Namaste. Namaste and welcome to this short video practice of yoga things that you can do for when you have a bad back. So I'm just going to show you a few bits here. I just want to stress that this is not a substitute for medical advice. So if your back is in acute agony to the point where you're needing to take painkillers and various other bits and bobs, I would consult a physiotherapist rather than a doctor. Physiotherapists kind of have more specialty knowledge in the area. But if you are a regular student of mine, or if you are somebody who wants to do just something to help a grumbling low back, then this is the video for you. And of course, you can share this with your physio. I've taken advice from physios, and these practices are all recommended in these circumstances. So if you wake up in the morning and your back's a little bit grumbly, or if it's getting tired during the day and you've been doing a lot of forward folding, then one of the best things that you can do is to lie down flat on your tummy. And this would be on a hard surface rather than on a bed. So on the floor, on a yoga mat, on a carpet, something like that, a surface that doesn't give underneath you. And so the first thing that you can do is come onto your tummy, just make a pillow out of your hands, rest your forehead on the back of your hands, and allow your legs to be far enough apart that you can turn your toes a little bit inwards and your heels a little bit outwards. So you can test to see if this is a comfortable position. And the reason why we're doing this position is because it keeps the back in its natural S-shaped curve. So if your back is out of alignment because you've been doing posturally or through your habitual patterns of repeated shapes that are outside of that natural alignment, then this will allow your back to settle into its natural alignment. And the point here is to be able to give the muscles that support the back some release so that they're not constantly switched on. And you can breathe deeply here, allowing the low back to gently rise and fall with the breath. So if the muscles of the belly are nice and relaxed as you breathe in, the back of the body will gently rise. There's a little sense of expansion around the low back. And as you breathe out, the body naturally comes back towards the mat. You can breathe deeply here for up to 5 minutes, longer if you prefer, if it's comfortable. If it's not comfortable to turn your head to face downwards, you can turn your head to one side and the other. So taking your time, maybe a minute on each side just before turning. And if you don't like having the arms up, you can have the arms down by the side with the head turned to the side. Or the forehead resting on a small block if you wanted, but head turned to the side is quite nice. And this also allows a little release across the upper back. But I have to say, I find that most people prefer the head supported by the hands. It keeps the neck in a good alignment as well. So what can you do if this posture is not comfortable? Well, there are various reasons why this posture might not be comfortable. It could be that your ankles are a little bit stiff and they don't enjoy being turned flat on the floor, or it could be that you feel, even lying on your tummy, a little bit of tension across the low back. So I'm going to show you what to do for both of those. So the first thing you can do is put something underneath your ankles. Now, I would probably choose a rolled blanket, but a bolster is what I've got to hand. So a rolled blanket, something that just gives a little lift to give a little bit more space for the shape of your foot and ankle together. And you can use either a slim block with a bit of support, or a very, very slim cushion. So this cushion is really narrow. It's one of our most squashed cushions, and it's just going to give a tiny bit of lift underneath the pelvis. So if lying flat on the belly doesn't work for you, Then using a little bit of lift underneath your pelvis and a little bit of lift underneath the ankles. Doesn't need to be as much as this. And then again, just seeing if that feels like a position in which you can relax and release. Taking those long, deep breaths. You can wiggle your hips from side to side if your back feels comfortable doing that. That sometimes helps to just nestle the front of the pelvis into the floor. And that sense of contact really allows us to let go of muscular tone in the back of the body. So a lot of the time, when we have a sore low back, it's tired. And if you think about our natural posture, most of the time is a little bit stooped. So the area of the low back where we would normally have a natural S curve, this natural soft back bend. I'm slightly exaggerating it for the purpose of this. But that natural curve in most people's posture is bent. So those muscles are in length, but they're not strong. And so if we allow them to get really, really tired from holding the body, which is quite weighty in this way, and our tummy muscles aren't working very well either, then lying on your tummy allows all the structures of the back to settle into a much more natural pattern than lying on your back. And we can allow them to relax those supportive muscles at the base of the back particularly. Of course, this posture works all the way up the spine. So if your back pain or discomfort isn't at the low back, then you might find that it works a little bit higher up too. If you're in really acute pain, but it is slightly softened by painkillers, you can try lying on your back lying on your front, as well. So explore this. Probably best to try it on a day when your back discomfort isn't super intense, to see if it's a posture that works for you. For a few people, lying on their tummies won't help, but you will know that within a few minutes. It won't really hurt either, it just won't be effective. So as with all yoga, particularly when it's a therapeutic application of yoga, then it's important to listen to your body and to be aware of its responses. Lots of the time, what we do is either effective or not effective, and we can tell by either a lessening or a softening of the intensity of our discomfort, or an increasing intensity of discomfort. So just bear that in mind. If you're doing something and it doesn't feel right, stop doing that. Consult a yoga teacher in person for a one-to-one or in class, or a physiotherapist. Very good. So lying on your tummy is a really good thing to do. I do it whenever if we're having a dinner party or something and I've been standing up in the kitchen, slightly hunched, prepping food a lot, or if I've had a big day in the garden, instead of sitting, which further accentuates that rounded nature at the back of the body, I lie on my tummy for a few minutes. It's great to do before going to bed. It's a fantastic thing to do first thing in the morning, to find that long, deep breath, softening all of the tension that's there, and just allowing the back to get to its natural shape. Super. So if that feels really nice and effective, and you're doing it quite regularly, then you can do some spinal extensions. So these would be like really gentle cobra poses and things like that. So if your back discomfort is just a little bit niggly, then you can try on your hands and knees, just making some movements of the spine. So we can really gently begin to tip the pelvis backwards and forwards, finding what feels like the right amount of movement for you. And here, very supported with the belly muscles. So by switching on our belly muscles, actually we encourage the muscles of the core to work. And so you might be aware of your pelvic floor engaging gently. And again, if this movement doesn't feel good, if after a few rounds it doesn't feel like it's easing or loosening or softening, then perhaps it's not the right movement for you. I like to do a little bit of side to side as well. If your back's very sensitive, you might prefer to leave that out. And then again, making movements that feel good. So circling the pelvis. Here I'm circling my shoulders in the opposite direction, so getting a little sort of wriggle through the whole of the back of the body and managing to go the opposite way as well. You'll notice I've got my jumper on, and that's because keeping my back warm, or not so that I've heated it up, but so that it's warm, yeah, I find useful. So if you have heard of icing an injury, then that is great. If you've got an area of the body that's having intense blood flow and it's sort of going through a healing process after a big trauma. But if you don't have that intense trauma, actually keeping your body warm will allow your muscles to soften. And as I say, it's usually that spasm, that big contraction of the muscles that is causing the back to feel uncomfortable. So if this gentle cat-cow, sideways, forwards and backwards and circling feels good, then you can make more movements like that. So particularly focused on extension. That's the part of that's the movement of the body that puts you into a back bend. So we're thinking about supporting it with the muscles of the shoulders, shoulder blades, arms, belly, pressing the feet into the floor, and then perhaps not rounding very far, but just coming to slightly off straight. So opening the front of the body, keeping the belly muscles very firm, and then just coming to a more neutral position. Opening the front of the body. You can glide the shoulders up and down. You can move as slowly as you would like. And if that feels good, then you might try a little bit of downward dog. So down dog is actually where the spine is lengthened rather than bent. So here we're going to keep the knees really bent. So we want them to be really, really bent. So often people keep their knees just a little bit bent, but we want them really bent. Pressing the chest towards the thighs and thinking about lifting the tailbone up. And if working with down dog on the floor isn't really something that feels comfortable, try it with the back of the sofa or a table or a kitchen counter or a chair or the wall. So here, again, you can wiggle the hips a little bit from side to side. What that does is it lengthens one side of the back and then the other, allow your head to be nice and relaxed, engage in your belly. And if that begins to ease off the feelings of discomfort in your back, you might come down to the mat, give yourself a little bit of a rest, either kneeling upright or maybe in a different position. Hands and knees is fine too. And just doing that a few more times, coming into down dog with really bent knees, thinking about lengthening the spine as much as possible, but lengthening the back of the body as much as possible. And as it happens, kneeling is a really good position to be in for any resting that you might want to do. So instead of sitting, when you sit, most of us don't have the strength of our posture to be able to sit in a nice lengthened position of the back. So we tend to slump. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing that as long as it doesn't hurt your back. But if your back is in a little bit of discomfort, particularly across the middle and low back, you might find that this sort of slumpy position is not very helpful, that it actually hinders your recovery process. So you can take anything that you can feel that you sit up on to support yourself in a kneeling position. And the natural process of kneeling means that the spine comes into the pelvis in a much more upright position. The pelvis isn't tucked under or tucked out, it's just sort of neutral. And it's much easier to sit with the back lengthened, and it's much more comfortable if you have had low back issues.
So do take this as an opportunity to explore that. It's also great after eating because it helps the digestive system to be really open, whereas sitting usually brings our knees a little bit closer to our torsos, so it closes down that space in the abdomen. So just two last things perhaps. So the first one is a little bit of those cobra spinal extensions. So if spinal extensions doesn't work for you, you'll know it from cat-cow, in which case don't progress to this. But if you're comfortable with the cat-cow, then you might like to come into lying on the floor with your forehead down. You want to press the feet gently into the floor. Think about perhaps engaging the buttocks ever so slightly, pressing the front of the pelvis into the floor and using the belly muscles. We're going to take the hands nice and wide to wherever feels comfortable, around about shoulder or chest height. And then simply pressing into the hands, allow the head and chest to lift. And as we lift the head and chest, we want to keep the belly muscles and the buttocks very engaged so that we find a length in the low back. So you can come gently down. Some people like to think about drawing the nose along the mat away from you, so above the head and up. That keeps a sense of length in the low back. And you can go a little bit up and down. If you find that going up and down isn't helpful, then don't do this. Just rest on your tummy, pillow out of the hands, toes together, heels apart. But if you do find it quite useful, then you might like to gradually press a little bit higher up. And unlike cobra, low cobras, gentle cobras in yoga, where we try to keep the weight off the hands, here we're trying to use the hands for a bit of support. So gliding the shoulder blades down, that action of squeezing the buttocks helps to keep length in the low back, which is what we want, and lifting in the belly muscles. And you might find that that just allows the back to realign. You don't have to come up very high at all. And this is a good one to add to your practice between your back being really twingy. Very good. If you want to do child's pose, then coming into child's pose with the knees really, really, really wide so that you can keep the arms reaching away. And there's much more length in the back this way rather than rounding. But again, if you prefer, you can stay a little bit higher up. And one of the nicest ways to use your bolster is for child's pose. So if you have it between the knees and you lay yourself over it, you can see that the back is in a much more lengthened rather than rounded position. There's still a lot of support underneath the body, and you can really let go of the effort in the shoulders and arms, which is a little less easy to do with the arms out in front. And I'd really recommend child's pose over a bolster. There is one more thing that I quite like to do, particularly if spinal extension. Two more things that I really like to do, particularly if spinal extension is not for you when your back is sore. So if lying on your tummy is fine, but doing the cat-cow or the cobra just doesn't feel good, you can try placing a bolster underneath the body around about the pubic bone, the front of the pelvis, and then lying across it so that it's supporting the length of the body. And this allows a very gentle softening of the natural back bend in the back of the body. You make fists out of the hands and rest your head, or put a block or cushions underneath your head here. And here the legs can be quite nice and wide and nice and relaxed. Again, if you need something underneath the ankles to make them feel comfortable, a rolled blanket or some cushions. And some gentle deep breaths. So it's the same principle as lying on the floor flat, but with a little ironing out of the curve of the low back. And that ironing out of the curve might be what just allows your body to soften and release down, which is what we're after. So the final thing that I like to do is with two bolsters. And I know most people don't have two bolsters. So if you can get two firmish supports of about the same size, it might be several sets of pillows or something similar. And getting into this might not be one easy to do when you've got a bad back, but if you use this in between acute pain episodes, then you might find it quite nice. So you lie on your back, buttocks on the floor, backs of the legs and heels of the feet supported by whatever it might be, around about this bolster height. Nice open arms, allowing the back of the head, backs of the arms and shoulders to soften down into the mat. And simply be here and breathe for 5, 10, 15 minutes if you like. Really nice to soften the effort across the pelvis, the low back area, the hips. If you've got hips that get irritated from walking because you've got perhaps one leg a little shorter than the other, or if you've had an injury of some kind, this can really allow the pelvis to settle and relax and release as well. The important thing to remember is that when you get up from the floor or from the bed, roll to one side and come up into sitting gently. If you have sciatica, then some of these practices will work and some of them are less appropriate, but I have other videos for when you have those feelings in the back and how you can just help a little bit day to day to make yourself more comfortable. Thank you for joining in this practice. There's more information and some helpful links in the description. I'll see you again soon. Namaste.